Bus driver Marcus Reed is on a routine shift on Route 14. He performs a small act he considers right, protecting a pedestrian. Then a white driver cuts him off, boards the bus, and starts punching and kicking. Marcus doesn't fight back. Minutes later, the police arrive, and the victim becomes the suspect. In court, a manipulated video turns restraint into a crime, until a gentle remark changes everything. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching this movie today? And if you believe that in life, if you just live well, everything will be all right, then this story is for you. Cleveland, Ohio always smelled different when rain hit warm asphalt, metal, wind, and something like old brick waking up. On this Tuesday afternoon, the sky hung low and gray over the west side, and a light drizzle stitched thin lines across the bus windshield like quiet warning. Route 14 rolled anyway. Marcus Reed sat behind the wheel with both hands at 10 and 2, steady as if the steering column were a promise. He was 31, tall, broad-shouldered, with a strong, athletic build shaped by years of early shifts and late nights. His skin was a deep brown, his face narrow with high cheekbones, and his eyes, dark and focused, held a calm that didn't come from luck. Marcus wore the Cleveland Transit blue uniform, short-sleeve shirt, dark pants, name badge pinned straight. His hair was cropped close, his jaw clean-shaven, his posture disciplined. People said Marcus drove like he prayed, quietly, carefully, like every life behind him mattered. And that wasn't just a saying. 3 years earlier, Marcus's younger brother had been hit by a speeding car while crossing with a walk signal. The driver never stopped. The case went cold. Since then, Marcus had developed a habit that looked like patience to strangers, but was really control. He never honked unless he had to, never shouted back, never gave anger the steering wheel. Inside the bus, the afternoon crowd was a mix of tired and ordinary, mothers with grocery bags, a couple of teenagers with wet hoodies, and several older passengers who rode Route 14 like it was a moving living room. In the front right priority seat sat Mrs. Dorothy Klein, an elderly white woman in her late 70s. She was short, frail, wrapped in a beige raincoat that made her look smaller than she already was. Her white hair was pinned into a neat bun, and her hands, thin and trembling, rested on the curved handle of a floral cane. Dorothy had the kind of face that seemed permanently apologetic, as if she had spent a lifetime saying sorry for taking up space. Behind her, a few rows back, sat Caleb Johnson, a black man around 55, medium tall with a sturdy build, a salt and pepper beard, and eyes that missed nothing. Caleb wore a dark work jacket with paint flecks on the sleeve. Someone who fixed things for a living. His expression was calm, but not soft. The calm of a man who had learned that the world sometimes needed you to stand up, even when you didn't want attention. Near the middle aisle stood Lily Harper, a white college student about 20, slim with a ponytail tucked under a baseball cap, her backpack hugged to her chest. Her clothes were simple: hoodie, jeans, worn sneakers, and her face had that mix of youth and exhaustion, like someone balancing tuition, work, and too many thoughts at night. Lily didn't speak much. She watched people the way some people watched storms. Marcus checked his side mirror, eased forward from the stoplight, and kept the bus smooth. Rain meant slippery paint lines. Rain meant impatient drivers. Rain meant mistakes that became headlines. As Route 14 approached Jefferson Avenue, traffic thickened. Headlights smeared into long, watery streaks. A delivery truck struggled to merge. A sedan braked too hard. Marcus did what he always did. He created space. Then, like a sudden shove in a crowded room, a second city bus cut across his lane. It came from the left, fast and too close, the back end swinging wide like it didn't care what was beside it. Behind that wheel sat Ethan Walker. Ethan was 42, tall, heavy-set, built like a man who took up room even when he sat down. He had a thick brown beard, close-trimmed, and a hard jaw beneath it. His eyes were pale and sharp, the kind that could look through you. He wore a transit driver uniform too, but it looked stretched across his frame, as if the fabric had surrendered. Ethan's face held a permanent edge, part irritation, part superiority. Like everyone else on the road was an obstacle placed there personally to offend him. Marcus's brain ran the calculation in a blink. Distance, speed, wet pavement, passengers standing. He slammed the brakes. The bus jolted. A chorus of startled gasps rose in the cabin. Lily grabbed a pole, her sneakers skidding half an inch. Caleb braced his shoulder against a seat back. Dorothy's cane slipped, and her body pitched forward. Marcus shot up from the seat and reached back with one arm without taking his eyes off the mirrors. "Ma'am!" he called, voice steady but urgent. Dorothy's knees buckled, but Marcus had already activated the hazard lights and held the brake. The bus shook once and settled. Dorothy caught herself with the edge of the seat, breathing hard, eyes wide with fear. Marcus exhaled through his nose. He looked at the mirror again and saw the other bus still angled across his lane, blocking traffic like a dare. He keyed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Route 14, Unit 6-14. Near Jefferson. Had to brake hard. Another bus cut in." Static crackled back. Old copy. Behind him, murmurs turned into complaints. A teenager muttered, "What the—" Marcus raised his hand. "Everyone okay?" he asked, scanning quickly. A mother nodded. Caleb lifted 2 fingers, a silent sign that he was fine. Dorothy gave a shaky thumbs up, embarrassed. Marcus's pulse pounded, but he kept his face neutral. He had learned a long time ago. If you look panicked, people become panic. He stood, stepped into the aisle, and went to Dorothy. "You all right, Ms. Klein?" he asked gently. Dorothy blinked at him. I think so. Thank you, dear." Her voice quivered. "That was close." "It was," Marcus said. He crouched, retrieved her cane, and placed it back into her hand like it mattered, as if her dignity mattered. "Stay seated until we're moving again." As he stood, he felt something else in the air, something heavier than rain. A door hissed open. At first, Marcus thought it was one of his own passengers shifting, but the sound was sharper, closer. He turned his head toward the front. The front door opened again, hard. A man climbed onto Marcus's bus like he owned it. Ethan Walker. No greeting, no apology, no, "Are you okay?" for the passengers he nearly injured, just storm and muscle. Ethan's boots thudded on the floor. He moved fast, shoulders squared, jaw clenched. His eyes locked onto Marcus with a look that said he'd already decided the story and Marcus was the villain. Marcus straightened. "Sir, you need to step back off the bus." Ethan didn't let him finish. "You think you can brake check me?" Ethan barked, voice loud enough to hit the back row. "You trying to start something?" Marcus blinked once, confused by the accusation. "You cut in front of me. I stopped so no one got hurt." Ethan laughed. One short, contemptuous sound. Then he swung. The punch landed on Marcus's cheekbone with a crack that echoed like a slammed book. Marcus's head snapped to the side. For a second, the world narrowed into bright dots. Pain flared hot across his face. He tasted blood. A woman screamed. Someone shouted, "Hey, stop!" Marcus staggered but didn't fall. His hands came up, not as fists but as shields. "Back up," Marcus said, voice hoarse. "Get off my bus." Ethan stepped in again, crowding him, breathing heavy. The smell of coffee and tobacco clung to him. "You're always the same," Ethan snarled, always acting like the victim. Marcus didn't understand what always meant. They had never spoken before today, but he recognized the tone. Someone reaching for a story older than the moment, something learned and repeated. Ethan swung again. Marcus turned his shoulder, letting the blow glance off his arm. He kept backing away, palms open. He was angry, furious, yet he refused to give Ethan what he seemed to want. A fight that would look equal on camera, equal in a report, equal in a courtroom. He knew how quickly defending yourself could become assault when the wrong eyes wrote the notes. From the middle aisle, Caleb Johnson rose. "Hey!" Caleb called, voice firm, father-like, the kind that usually stopped trouble in its tracks. "That's enough. Get off the bus. He didn't do anything." Ethan's head snapped toward Caleb, eyes narrowing like he'd found a second target. "This got nothing to do with you," Ethan spat. "It does when you're beating someone in front of kids," Caleb said, stepping closer. His hands were open too, palms out, a universal sign for peace. Ethan didn't respect peace. He shoved Caleb hard in the chest. Caleb stumbled backward into a seat, catching himself. The bus filled with shocked noise, people shouting, crying, calling 911. Caleb regained his balance and stepped forward again, refusing to sit down like fear was acceptable. Ethan threw a punch. It struck Caleb's jaw. Caleb's head jerked. He grunted, but he didn't collapse. His eyes flashed. Pain, yes, but also something sharper. Resolve. Marcus saw it, and something broke inside him, not into violence, but into determination. "Stop!" Marcus shouted, louder now, his anger no longer hidden. "Leave him alone!" Ethan turned back toward Marcus, chest heaving. "You want to be a hero," Ethan said, voice dripping with mockery. "Go ahead, swing." Marcus didn't. He stood tall, bruised, breathing, refusing to give Ethan the satisfaction of turning him into a headline. Outside the windshield, traffic had begun to jam. Horns blared in frustration. The rain kept falling indifferent. A siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. Lily Harper, still gripping the pole, raised her phone with shaking hands. Her camera light blinked. She wasn't thinking about likes or views. She was thinking about proof because something in her gut told her that if this became someone else's story, it would be twisted. Dorothy Klein clutched her cane to her chest, eyes wet. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God." The bus door remained open. Ethan stood in the entrance like a storm that refused to leave. Marcus's cheek throbbed. A swelling warmth spread under his eye. He could already feel the bruise forming, dark, ugly, visible. But he held his ground. He didn't swing. He didn't curse. He didn't even step forward. He simply stood there, a man trying to keep the world from getting worse while the world tried its hardest to make him the problem. The sirens grew louder, and in that moment before the police even arrived, Marcus Reed understood something with cold clarity. This wasn't just a fight on a bus. This was a test of how truth survived noise, and whether anyone would care enough to tell it. The police arrived within minutes, their red and blue lights washing the rain-soaked street in harsh color. Traffic on Jefferson Avenue came to a standstill as officers moved quickly, hands resting near their belts, eyes scanning the scene with practiced impatience. The first officer to step onto the bus was Officer Daniel Harris, a white man in his mid-30s, average height, broad through the chest, his uniform pressed sharp as if discipline could be ironed into fabric. His face was clean-shaven, his eyes a flat gray that revealed little curiosity and even less warmth. Daniel had grown up believing order mattered more than explanations. His father, a retired cop, had taught him that hesitation was weakness, and that control kept chaos from winning. Behind him followed Officer Megan Brooks, a white woman around 30, tall and slim, brown hair pulled tight into a regulation bun. Her expression was alert, but guarded. Megan was newer to the force, still learning when to speak and when to stay quiet. She noticed details others ignored, but she had learned quickly that noticing did not always mean being heard. Their boots echoed against the bus floor. Marcus Reed stood near the front, his cheek already swelling, a faint line of blood drying at the corner of his mouth. His breathing was controlled, but his heart hammered hard against his ribs. Pain pulse through his face in slow, heavy waves. Still, he kept his hands visible, open at his sides, his posture upright. Ethan Walker did not. Ethan stood closer to the door, shoulders squared, arms loose as if he had merely been interrupted during a justified argument. His beard was slightly damp from the rain, his chest rising and falling fast, not from fear, but from adrenaline. His eyes darted between the officers, already calculating which version of the story would land best. Officer Harris pointed a finger toward Marcus. "You, step back. Turn around." Marcus blinked, surprised but compliant. He stepped back slowly. "It was him," Ethan said immediately, his voice loud, confident, spilling over the moment like it had been rehearsed. "He brake-checked me, almost caused an accident. Then he came at me like he wanted a fight." Marcus turned his head slightly. "That's not what happened. I stopped because an elderly woman almost fell. He came onto my bus and—" Officer Harris cut him off with a raised palm. "You'll have your turn." But the tone said otherwise. Megan Brooks glanced at Marcus's face, at the swelling bruise forming beneath his eye, then at Ethan's unmarked knuckles. Her brow tightened slightly, but she said nothing. Passengers spoke up at once. "He didn't touch him," someone shouted from the back. "That man ran on here swinging," another voice cried. Caleb Johnson stepped forward, jaw sore, eyes steady. "Officer, I was there. I tried to stop it. That driver attacked first." Officer Harris turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Sir, I need you to stay seated." Caleb hesitated. He had learned long ago that pushing too hard in moments like this came at a cost. Slowly, he stepped back. Dorothy Klein clutched her cane, her hands shaking. "The young man, Marcus, he saved me," she said softly, almost apologetically. "He didn't do anything wrong." Officer Harris nodded once, curt and dismissive, as if acknowledging a child. "Ma'am, we'll take statements later." Ethan sighed loudly, shaking his head. "This always happens," he muttered, loud enough to be heard. "You try to do the right thing, and suddenly you're the bad guy." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, not anger this time, but disbelief. He looked at the officers, searching for something human in their faces. "Please," he said, his voice low. "Just check the cameras. My bus has them. Ask dispatch. Ask anyone here." Officer Harris exchanged a glance with Megan. "We'll sort it out downtown," Harris said. "Both of you." Metal cuffs clicked shut around Marcus's wrists first. The cold bite of steel sent a jolt through him. Not just physical, but something deeper. The cuffs felt heavier than they should have been, like they carried assumptions with them. Ethan watched with a thin smile he tried to hide. "Hey, I don't want trouble," he said. "But rules are rules." Marcus was led off the bus under the rain. His head bowed slightly, not in shame, but to keep the blood from dripping onto his uniform. Ethan followed, uncuffed. At the precinct, the fluorescent lights hummed without mercy. The building smelled of old coffee and disinfectant, a place designed to scrub stories down to paperwork. Marcus was escorted into a small interview room, gray walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs. He sat alone for nearly an hour, his cheek throbbing, his wrists aching where the cuffs had been removed but not forgotten. When Officer Harris returned, he carried a thin folder. "You're being held overnight," Harris said flatly, disturbing the peace. "Assault." Marcus stared at him. "Assault? I didn't touch him." Harris shrugged. "His statement says otherwise." "What about my injuries?" Marcus asked. "What about witnesses?" "We'll review everything," Harris said, already standing. "For now, this is how it's written." Down the hall, Ethan Walker signed a form and pulled on his jacket. An officer clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "You're free to go. We'll be in touch." Ethan nodded, grateful but unsurprised. As he stepped out into the night, rain still falling, he felt the familiar comfort of being believed. Marcus spent the night on a narrow bench in a holding cell, the concrete cold seeping through his clothes. He pressed his back against the wall, closed his eyes, and breathed through the pain. He thought of his brother. He thought of his mother's voice telling him to stay calm, to stay alive. He wondered how easily a moment could be rewritten. Across the city, Lily Harper sat on her bed in a cramped student apartment, her laptop open, her phone trembling in her hands. She replayed the video she had taken on the bus, Marcus reaching back to steady the old woman, Ethan storming in, the sudden violence. Lily was not loud by nature. She hated confrontation. Growing up, she had learned that silence kept things simple. But as she watched Marcus's face take that first blow, something shifted. "This isn't right," she whispered. She backed up the video twice, emailed it to herself, then to a cloud drive. Her fingers hovered over the share button, hesitating. Not from doubt, but from fear. She knew stories like this. She had seen how easily the wrong person carried the blame. Finally, she closed her laptop and sat still, heart racing. "Tomorrow," she told herself, "tomorrow I'll figure out who needs to see this." Back at the precinct, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He didn't know yet that evidence was forming without him. All he knew was that somewhere between the rain and the sirens, he had crossed an invisible line, one that turned a man trying to protect others into a man accused of causing harm. And the paper trail had already begun. The courthouse in downtown Cleveland rose like a block of pale stone against the late morning sky, its steps worn smooth by decades of arguments, verdicts, and quiet despair. 2 weeks had passed since the incident on Jefferson Avenue, but for Marcus Reed, time had not softened anything. The bruise on his face had faded into a yellow shadow, yet something heavier had settled in his chest, a constant awareness that the truth no longer belonged to him alone. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was cool and dry, smelling faintly of paper and old wood. Rows of benches filled slowly with observers, a mix of journalists, curious locals, and a few transit workers who recognized Marcus from Route 14. Their faces were cautious, unreadable. At the front sat Judge Richard Coleman. He was in his late 60s, tall even while seated with a rigid posture that suggested discipline rather than comfort. His hair was thin and silver, combed straight back, and his face carried deep lines etched by years of restraint. Coleman was known for efficiency. He disliked emotional displays, disliked disorder even more. To him, court was a machine, facts in, rulings out. Intentions were secondary. Marcus sat beside his public defender, Angela Morris, a black woman in her early 40s. She was of average height with a slim build, her dark hair cut neatly at her shoulders. Angela's eyes were sharp, observant, shaped by years of standing between people like Marcus and a system that rarely gave the benefit of doubt. She spoke calmly, almost softly, but there was steel beneath it. Early in her career, she had lost a client to an unjust plea deal, a loss that had hardened her resolve, but deepened her patience. Across the aisle sat Ethan Walker, relaxed in his chair, arms folded. He wore a clean button-down shirt and slacks, his beard neatly trimmed. There was no trace of injury on him, no sign of the violence he had unleashed. Beside him was his attorney, Michael Trent, a white man in his 50s with a broad frame and a confident smile. Michael was known for his presence. He spoke loudly, gestured freely, and believed persuasion mattered more than nuance. When court was called to order, silence fell quickly. Michael Trent rose first. "Your Honor," he began, voice clear and assured, "this case is about responsibility. My client, Mr. Ethan Walker, was operating his vehicle lawfully when Mr. Marcus Reed engaged in erratic driving behavior. My client approached Mr. Reed only to warn him of the danger he was causing. What followed was an act of self-defense." Ethan nodded slightly as if affirming his own story. Marcus listened, jaw tight, hands clasped together to keep them from trembling. When Ethan was called to testify, he stood tall, shoulders back. "I've been driving buses for over 15 years, he said. "I know safety. When Mr. Reed slammed his brakes, he nearly caused a pile-up. I went over there to talk to him man to man. He came at me aggressive." Judge Coleman watched without expression. Angela Morris stood when it was her turn. "Mr. Walker," she asked evenly, "did you strike Mr. Reed?" Ethan hesitated, then shrugged. "I defended myself." Angela nodded once and returned to her seat. She knew this wasn't the moment to push. Then came the video. Michael Trent approached the bench with a flash drive. "This is footage from my client's dashboard camera," he said. "It shows exactly what happened." The lights dimmed slightly as the screen flickered on. The video played. Traffic, rain, the sudden stop. Marcus's bus ahead, braking hard. Then Marcus stepping down from his bus, moving quickly. That was all. No audio. No footage of Ethan charging onto the bus. No punches. No screaming passengers. No elderly woman almost falling. The video ended. Michael spread his hands. "As the court can see, Mr. Reed acted recklessly and aggressively." Angela stood immediately. "Your Honor, this video is incomplete. It does not show—" Judge Coleman raised a hand. "The video shows what it shows, Ms. Morris." Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. He stood when permitted to speak, his voice steady but strained. "I stopped because a woman almost fell. I never touched him. I didn't fight back." Judge Coleman regarded him for a long moment. "Intent is difficult to prove, Mr. Reed." The gavel struck. The ruling came swiftly. "Based on the evidence presented," Judge Coleman said, "the court finds Mr. Reed responsible for disorderly conduct and assault." The room went still. Marcus's shoulders slumped slightly, not in defeat but in disbelief. Angela closed her eyes for a brief second, then placed a hand on his arm. Ethan exhaled, relief flickering across his face before he masked it. Outside the courtroom, reporters were already gathering. Cameras flashed. Microphones extended like weapons. A headline was drafted within minutes. "Bus altercation turns violent. Black driver accused of provocation." Marcus walked past them without speaking, the words blurring together. He felt smaller leaving the building than he had entering it, as if the walls themselves had pressed the judgment into him. Across the street, unseen by Marcus, Lily Harper stood with her backpack slung over one shoulder. She had attended the hearing quietly, sitting in the back. Her face was pale, her jaw clenched. She had watched the video play and felt her stomach drop. "That's not the whole thing," she whispered. She tightened her grip on her phone. The truth, she realized, hadn't been denied. It had simply not been shown. The story moved faster than Marcus Reed ever could. It began quietly, the way most truths do, shared not with microphones, but with shaking hands and a decision made alone. Lily Harper sat at the small desk in her apartment, the glow of her laptop lighting the pale walls. Outside, Cleveland hummed with late-night traffic and distant sirens. Lily was still the same, 20 years old, slim, restless, her brown hair pulled back into a careless ponytail, but something in her posture had changed. She no longer hunched, as if trying to disappear. She leaned forward, elbows on the desk, jaw set. Lily had grown up avoiding conflict. Her parents had taught her that staying quiet kept the peace. But watching the courtroom footage replay in her mind, the edited video, the swift judgment, had left a knot in her stomach that wouldn't loosen. She had seen Marcus steady an elderly woman. She had seen him take the first blow. Silence, she realized, was no longer neutral. She clicked, upload. The video wasn't long. Grainy, shaky, imperfect. But it showed what the courtroom hadn't. Marcus's arm stretched back to protect Mrs. Klein. his body turning sideways to absorb blows without striking back, the sudden chaos as Ethan Walker surged forward with fists raised. Lily added no commentary. She titled it simply, Jefferson Avenue, Route 14, What the Camera Missed. Within hours, it spread. Comments poured in. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Some questioned it, many didn't. The image of restraint in the face of violence cut through the noise with an unexpected force. By morning, a second video surfaced. It came from Thomas Nguyen, a Vietnamese-American rideshare driver in his late 30s who had been stopped behind the buses that afternoon. Thomas was short and wiry with rectangular glasses perpetually sliding down his nose in a habit of recording traffic incidents for insurance purposes. His dashcam had captured a clear angle of Ethan Walker stepping off his bus first, striding toward Marcus's vehicle with unmistakable aggression. Thomas had hesitated before sending it in. He disliked attention, disliked controversy even more. Years earlier, after reporting a hit and run, he had received threats online that lingered long after the case closed. But watching Lily's video, and then the news headlines that still blamed Marcus, pushed him past that fear. He emailed the clip to a local station. The broadcast aired it that evening. The narrative cracked. Hospitals entered the conversation next, not with opinions, but with records. St. Anne's Medical Center released a summary of Marcus Reed's examination following the arrest. The attending physician, Dr. Elena Ruiz, a Latina woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and a precise manner of speech, had documented everything carefully. Elena was known among colleagues as meticulous, shaped by an early career mistake when a rushed note had been used to discredit a patient. She never rushed again. Her report stated plainly, mild concussion, facial contusions, defensive bruising along the forearms. No injuries consistent with striking another person. The absence spoke loudly. By the next day, the headline shifted. New footage raises questions in bus driver case. Phones began ringing across the city. Caleb Johnson sat at his kitchen table when the call came. Morning light streamed through the window, catching the gray in his beard. Caleb had barely slept since the trial. His jaw still ached when he chewed, a dull reminder of that punch. He had spent his life fixing broken things, walls, sinks, doors, believing most damage could be repaired if someone cared enough. "Mr. Johnson?" the producer asked. "Would you be willing to speak on camera?" Caleb looked at his reflection in the dark screen of the television. He saw a man older than he felt, shoulders a little heavier than before. He also saw something else. Responsibility. "I will," he said, "but I'm telling it straight." The interview aired that night. Caleb sat under studio lights, hands folded, voice calm but firm. He described stepping forward to stop the fight. He described being hit. He described Marcus never once raising his fists. "I've seen anger," Caleb said, looking directly into the camera. "That wasn't it. That man was trying to keep people safe." The clip spread quickly. Pressure mounted, not just from the public, but from within institutions that preferred quiet resolutions. Emails flooded the prosecutor's office. Community leaders demanded answers. Transit workers organized a small rally outside City Hall, holding signs that read, "Show the whole, truth, and restraint is not guilt." Inside the prosecutor's office, Assistant District Attorney Karen Whitfield read through the growing stack of evidence with a tightening expression. Karen was a white woman in her late 40s, tall and slender, with short blonde hair and a reputation for pragmatism. She had built her career on efficiency, not idealism, but she had also built it on credibility, and credibility was now at risk. Karen had reviewed hundreds of cases in her career. She recognized the pattern when she saw it, a story that moved too quickly, evidence that fit too neatly. The new footage didn't just add context. It contradicted the foundation. She closed the file, exhaled slowly, and made the call. "We need to reopen this," she said. Across town, Marcus Reed sat alone in his apartment, the television muted. The city outside looked the same as it always had: brick buildings, passing cars, a distant train horn. But it felt unfamiliar, like a place he had stepped out of and couldn't quite return to. He had avoided the news, avoided his phone. The words had already done enough damage. A knock came at the door. Marcus opened it to find Angela Morris standing there, her coat still on, eyes bright with something he hadn't seen in weeks. "They're reopening the case," she said. Marcus didn't answer right away. He leaned against the door frame, steadying himself. Relief came, slowly, cautiously, like something that might disappear if he reached for it too fast. Outside, the city buzzed with a new energy. One born not of certainty, but of scrutiny. For the first time since Jefferson Avenue, the truth was no longer alone. The second hearing took place on a Monday morning when Cleveland felt unusually still. The courthouse steps were crowded long before the doors opened. Reporters clustered with cameras ready, voices low but urgent. The atmosphere was different now. No longer curious, no longer casual. This time, people arrived expecting something to change. Inside courtroom 4B, every bench was filled. Marcus Reed sat straighter than he had during the first trial. He wore a simple dark suit borrowed from a co-worker, the sleeves slightly tight around his forearms. His face still carried faint traces of the bruising, now yellowed and fading, but his eyes were clear. He looked tired, but not broken. Weeks of waiting, of being spoken about rather than listened to, had carved a quiet resolve into him. Beside him, Angela Morris organized her notes with careful precision. She looked the same as before, composed, focused, but there was a subtle tension in her jaw. This hearing mattered. Not only for Marcus, but for the credibility of everything she believed the law was meant to be. She had reviewed every new video, every medical report, every sworn statement twice, sometimes 3 times. This time, she intended to leave nothing unanswered. Across the aisle, Ethan Walker appeared smaller than he had before. He still wore confidence like armor, but it no longer fit as cleanly. His shoulders were stiff, his beard trimmed shorter than usual, his eyes restless. He sat beside Michael Trent, who leaned in close, whispering advice with forced calm. Michael's usual smile was absent. He had spent the past few days responding to calls from colleagues who suddenly wanted distance. Judge Richard Coleman entered the courtroom without ceremony. He looked unchanged, tall, rigid, unreadable, but those closest to the bench noticed something subtle. He carried a thicker file this time. He paused before sitting, scanning the room as if aware, finally, of the weight it carried. The proceedings began. Angela Morris stood first. Her voice was even, deliberate. She introduced the newly submitted evidence: Lily Harper's video, Thomas Nguyyen's dashcam footage, hospital records, sworn testimony from multiple passengers. She did not dramatize. She let the facts breathe. The videos played in full. The courtroom watched in silence as Marcus steadied Mrs. Klein, as Ethan stormed onto the bus, as fists flew and Marcus retreated rather than retaliated. Some people shifted uncomfortably. A woman in the second row covered her mouth. Judge Coleman leaned forward slightly, his hands folded. Thomas Nguyyen's dashcam footage followed, showing Ethan stepping off his bus first, his movement aggressive and unprovoked. The timestamps aligned. The narrative that had once seemed so clean now unraveled in plain view. Witnesses were called. Caleb Johnson took the stand again. Under oath, he spoke slowly, carefully describing the moment he stepped between 2 men and was struck for it. He did not exaggerate, he did not accuse, he simply told what happened. His voice never shook. Mrs. Dorothy Klein followed, assisted to the stand. She looked smaller than before, wrapped in a light gray sweater, her cane resting against her knee. Her voice trembled, but her words did not. "That young man saved me," she said, nodding toward Marcus. He didn't raise his hands. Not once. Even Dr. Elena Ruiz testified briefly via recorded statement, explaining the nature of Marcus's injuries in clinical terms that left little room for interpretation. Throughout it all, Ethan stared straight ahead. Michael Trent asked fewer questions than usual. When he did speak, his voice lacked its former confidence. At last, Judge Coleman called for closing statements. Michael Trent rose, attempted to reframe, to salvage intent from the wreckage of evidence. He spoke of confusion, of heightened emotions, of moments misunderstood. His words echoed, but they did not land. Angela Morris followed. She did not raise her voice. She did not appeal to emotion. She ended simply. Restraint was treated as guilt. Silence was mistaken for aggression. This court has now seen the whole truth. Then the judge turned to Marcus. "Mr. Reed," Coleman said, his tone neutral, "before the court deliberates, do you wish to make a statement?" Angela glanced at Marcus. She had prepared him for this moment, but had not scripted it. Some things, she believed, could not be written by anyone else. Marcus stood. For a brief second, the room seemed to hold its breath. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a quiet presence. He did not grip the podium. He did not look at Ethan. He looked at the judge, not defiantly, not pleadingly, but steadily. "I didn't choose the color of my skin," Marcus said, his voice low but clear. "But I can choose not to do harm, even when harm is done to me." The words settled, heavy and simple. "That day," he continued, "I chose to protect my passengers. I chose not to fight back. I chose what I believed was right." He stopped there. No defense, no accusation, no anger. Silence followed. Thick, complete. Judge Coleman lowered his gaze to the file in front of him. For the first time, his expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough to be noticed. He sat back, considering. The gavel struck once. The ruling was brief. "In light of the full evidence presented," Judge Coleman said, "this court finds that Marcus Reed acted in defense of others and did not commit assault. All charges against Mr. Reed are dismissed." A breath moved through the room like wind through leaves. Furthermore, the judge continued, "Ethan Walker is found guilty of assault, falsification of testimony, and deliberate manipulation of evidence." Ethan's head snapped up. Michael Trent placed a hand on his arm, but it was too late. The weight of consequence settled where confidence had once lived. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, not in relief alone, but in release. Angela exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering at last. Justice, delayed, had arrived. The city exhaled slowly after the verdict, as if Cleveland itself had been holding its breath. Rain gave way to clear mornings, and sunlight traced familiar lines along brick buildings and steel rails. For Marcus Reed, the days that followed felt unreal, not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because the weight he had carried alone was finally being set down in public. The settlement arrived quietly, not with a ceremony but with paperwork and signatures. It was substantial, enough to cover medical bills, lost wages, and the damage done to his name. More important than the number was the letter that came with it, printed on thick paper and signed by the Transit Authority's board. The apology was public. At a press conference held in the depot's old training hall, Sarah Collins, the Transit Authority's Director of Operations, stood at the podium. Sarah was a white woman in her early 50s, tall and composed with short auburn hair and a habit of clasping her hands when she spoke. She had built her career on logistics and safety metrics, not headlines. Years earlier, a bus accident caused by ignored warnings had cost a driver his life, and the memory had shaped her leadership. Methodical, sometimes rigid, but rooted in accountability. "We failed Marcus Reed," she said, voice steady. We failed to protect one of our own when he acted to protect others. Cameras clicked. Marcus stood off to the side, hands folded, listening. He did not smile. He did not need to. The words themselves mattered. The authority restored his record in full. His name was cleared. The incident report amended. A formal notice circulated to every depot, correcting the narrative that had followed him like a shadow. Then came the invitation. Sarah approached Marcus privately after the conference. "We're starting a new safety initiative," she said. "Real-world scenarios, de-escalation, passenger protection. We want you to lead the training." Marcus studied her face. He saw sincerity, but also something else. Recognition that systems only improve when they listen to those who endure their failures. "I'm not a lecturer," he said. Sarah nodded. "You don't have to be. You just have to be honest." He accepted. Training sessions began the following month. Marcus stood in front of small groups of new drivers, men and women of different ages and backgrounds, wearing his uniform again, shoulders squared. He spoke plainly about blind spots, about patience under pressure, about the difference between control and restraint. He did not recount the trial in detail. He focused on choices, the ones made in seconds that could echo for years. The room was often quiet when he finished. Outside of work, life resumed its quieter rhythms. Marcus returned to early mornings and late afternoons, to grocery lists and laundry and the comfort of routines. He walked more now, letting his thoughts stretch out alongside the streets. Sometimes, he stopped at the corner park where children played and dogs chased tennis balls without concern for headlines. One morning, before dawn fully broke, Marcus reported for duty. Route 14. The bus hummed awake beneath his hands. The city smelled clean after a night rain. He adjusted the mirrors, checked the aisle, and pulled away from the depot as the sky softened from gray to blue. Passengers boarded. Some familiar, some new. A mother thanked him for waiting as she folded a stroller. A construction worker nodded in recognition. A teenager glanced up from her phone and offered a shy smile. At the third stop, Dorothy Klein stepped aboard. She looked brighter than before, her beige coat replaced by a soft yellow sweater. Her cane tapped lightly against the floor as she made her way to the priority seat. When she looked up and saw Marcus, her face lit with recognition. "Well," she said warmly, settling in, "I was hoping it would be you." Marcus smiled. A real one this time. "Good morning, Miss Klein." She returned the smile, eyes crinkling. "Good morning, dear." The bus moved on. As the route unfolded, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected. Not triumph, not pride, but calm. The kind that comes when a story reaches its proper end. At a red light on Jefferson Avenue, he stopped smoothly. The crosswalk signal changed. An elderly man stepped off the curb, slow but steady. Marcus waited without impatience, hands relaxed on the wheel. No horns blared, no doors flew open. When the light turned green, he continued on. Later that day, as the bus neared the end of the line, Marcus caught his reflection in the mirror. Older, perhaps, but clearer. He thought of the sentence he had spoken in court, how it had not been crafted to persuade but to align himself with something he believed in. He understood now that justice did not always arrive quickly. Sometimes it took witnesses finding their voices, records being read fully, and people choosing courage over comfort. Sometimes it took one person refusing to become what the moment demanded of them. As the bus pulled back into the depot, Marcus shut down the engine and sat for a moment in the quiet. He breathed in, then out, letting the day settle. Outside, the city moved forward. And so did he. Ultimately, Marcus Reed's story reminds us of a quiet truth the world often forgets. Justice is not driven by numbers, power, or status, but by quality. There will be times when doing the right thing makes you look wrong, when restraint is mistaken for weakness, and silence is written as guilt. But the truth always finds its way to its witness. You may not choose the path laid out before you, or the burdens others place on your shoulders, but you always choose who you become in the storm. And when you choose kindness over cruelty, courage over anger, and faith over bitterness, the light will find you. Because even when the world distorts the story, the truth is never buried, and kindness is never wasted.